are decided in the past. And do we mention the principle of stare decisis? Yes, let the decision stand. Okay? I think the last thing that we mentioned was, how do you know when it's time to reverse a decision? When it's time to not go by precedent?
When the decisions in the past were not always the best decision to make.
How do we know that when it happens? What is it? All right, one of the things that changes is the information that we have. Sometimes the Supreme Court will reverse an issue when we gain more information. And the example I gave other classes, I don't know if I started talking about this the other day, but same-sex marriage. Right? From the time that the Supreme Court made rulings that would not allow same-sex marriage to 2015, when they changed themselves, we learned a lot of things about homosexuality. That it's not considered a mental disorder anymore. That people who were homosexuals started to defy stereotypes. And that indeed they could parent children. Who knew? Right? And so all of a sudden the Supreme Court said, look, we know more than what we used to. On top of that, the Supreme Court will sometimes reverse itself when something about public opinion and society has changed. Right? Would you say in the last 50 to 60 years that American society has changed its stance or its views on homosexuality? Significantly. Sometimes the court says it's time to just change because of this. Now, one other reason which they would reverse themselves is if they look at prior cases, precedent, and see that decisions were not made in accordance with good logic and with the law. Right? If they're like, hey, I don't know who decided this case 60 years ago, but they had no clue what they were talking about. Right? So largely they look to precedent. We try to provide as much consistency as possible. Consistency is good. Right? Every now and again, though, the Supreme Court will announce a type of decision called a per curiam decision. Okay? A per curiam decision is a decision, a Supreme Court decision that cannot be used as precedent. Sometimes the Supreme Court says certain situations are so unique that we don't want this to be an issue that comes before the court frequently. And so they issue what are called per curiam decisions. A good example, Bush versus Gore back in the contested election of 2000. You guys weren't alive then, but when they made that decision, we said, we don't want this coming up frequently. Okay, we don't want to be deciding elections and the turnout of elections. Per curiam decisions, they can be made and they don't get to use them as precedent. So if somebody today tried to want to build an argument about contesting an election using Bush versus Gore and telling the court, that's a precedent, the court would be like, no, it's not. That was a per curiam decision. It's like it happened, but it didn't happen. All right. One figure that comes before the Supreme Court very frequently is a government official known as the Solicitor General. The Solicitor General. Anytime that the United States, actually let's take it back, this will be a good way to describe it. The Solicitor General is America's top attorney. They're the top lawyer for the United States. When the United States is a party in a Supreme Court case, they're the attorney that's going to argue the case. When the U.S. is party to a case in front of the Supreme Court, the Solicitor General will argue it. That happens pretty frequently, so the Solicitor General appears before the Supreme Court on a regular basis. It's not uncommon that the Solicitor General actually knows the justices and kind of has a, I don't want to call it a friendship, but definitely a working relationship with them. Sometimes they even refer to the Solicitor General as the 10th Justice. Right? That way they can play a full court basketball game. I got that nice gym, it'd be a shame for it to go to waste. Can you imagine the Supreme Court playing a basketball game? I don't know. Some of them are too old. Too old. All right. Now, something else that's relevant for us too. Each Supreme Court justice gets 4 law clerks. And they're called law clerks, but they should really be called minions. Little helpers. It's like your research assistant. Your law clerks do all the grunt work for you. if we're working on a Second Amendment gun rights case, I'm going to be tell my law clerks, hey, I need you to do research for me. I need every gun case that has been relevant in the United States history, and I need them all tomorrow, and I need you to be able to brief me on each one and tell me the significant points. Yeah, here's the thing though. Being a law clerk for a Supreme Court justice is a big deal because when you get that experience, people in the private sector want that. Law firms like that you've been around one of the Supreme Court justices and know how they think and how they make decisions. Plus, usually to get those Supreme Court law clerk jobs, you got to be like a very top law school graduate. It's a big deal that, it's a stepping stone oftentimes. And usually you serve for a year, 2 years in that particular role and you move on. But that's an important experience to have. Okay? So the Supreme Court's got a lot of functioning parts to it. Now, some justices use their law clerks and they give them important jobs. Others are like, hey, Kaylee, go get me some coffee. What? This is a law clerk job. You'll do what I tell you, woman. Don't worry, there's women on the court now too. They would never say that to you. Well, maybe some of them would. All right, now, the Supreme Court, even though they make their decisions, they still get checked just like the other two branches do. And there's a variety of things that the other two branches can do to check them. We're going to mention some of those up here. Legislative and executive can both do things to the Supreme Court to make sure that the Supreme Court doesn't go too far off the rails in their decision making. What's something the legislative branch could do?
Approve judges.
What is it?
Approve the judges.
They can confirm the justices. The Senate confirms justices. What's something else they can do to check the judiciary?
Pass a law that affects the judiciary.
Pass laws which affect the judiciary. And one of those, one important one, would be budget. They're like, oh, you had $1 million last year for your utilities. Let's see how you do with half that. That would be awkward. What else can they do to minimize the impact or mess with the Supreme Court? They can impeach. Start making crazy decisions, we will impeach you.
Can they overrule court decision?
How can they overrule a court decision? There's only you're right, but there's something they have to do. Something specific. If the Supreme Court says something's unconstitutional, how do you make it constitutional?
Amend the Constitution.
You have to amend the Constitution. You can amend the Constitution, and they've done that. There's been instances where the Supreme Court made a decision, and they're like, well, obviously we have to fix that. Okay? If you said, like, for example, that X, Y, and Z are unconstitutional, the Congress could always just say, well, you know what? We need to amend the Constitution. It's really difficult, but we're going to make it happen. And then it'll say X, Y, and Z are legally permissible.
So will people's sentences change if the law changes?
Typically, it depends. Okay? Now, they can pass a law today, like, let's say, for instance, and this will get us, not to get too far off the rails, but like if they said retroactively you had to minimize their sentence or cut it back, then yes, you could do that. Or if the Supreme Court said that we find life sentences to be cruel and unusual, then you'd have to go back and do something about that.
So what about the whole decriminalizing drugs thing in Oregon? Was that when that was passed, did it affect anyone that was arrested or?
Great question. They would have to specifically put that in the legislation that anybody convicted, we're going to, ultimately do.
So it's just future conviction?
But yeah, they would say right now they're probably just future people. But I think if you were going to do that, to change policy like that, you need to do something for the people that are already in jail for that. Okay? Anything else the legislative can do to mess with the judiciary or keep them in line, so to speak? I feel like we're missing something. Firm justices, pass laws, impeachment, amend the Constitution. I've got the major ones. Let's go over to the executive branch. Executive branch has a couple things they could do to mess with the judiciary.
Appointing justices.
Okay, they appoint them. Appointment power. That gives them an element of control over the courts. What else do they do to make sure the courts don't make crazy decisions? One other thing, I don't know if you would think about this, pardoning power. If somebody's the victim of an injustice and the courts won't do anything about it, you can pardon them. That'd be nice. And there's one more thing in particular. This is a pretty powerful one here too. This is going to Federal 78. What can the president simply refuse? What is it?
Refuse to enforce.
He can refuse to enforce the decisions. All right? The president could just simply say, yeah, you made a decision and I'm not going to do anything about it. Ooh. Right? So you see there's ways that the other two branches can check the judiciary and make sure they don't go too crazy in their decision making. If the Supreme Court starts making some weird decisions, well, they can do something about it. Okay? But you'll find out that the Supreme Court and the judicial branch also have some protections from the other two branches and from public opinion. Okay? There's things built in that help them out. What's something that protects the judicial branch from the other branches in the public?
They're not directly
They're not elected,
elected.
they're appointed. Who does that protect them from? The people, all right? And once you're on the Supreme Court, you don't have to really worry about what the people think of you. They don't even know what you look like. They don't even know your name. What else protects them? They get a lifetime tenure. That protects them from both the people and the government. Once you put them on there, they're on there for life. Oh, man. Now, something we haven't mentioned, but you would know. Do you know what you cannot do to judges? This is great. You'll love this. You can't reduce their salary. Federal judges, their salary cannot be reduced. It's specifically written in the Constitution that way. It can be increased. It can always be increased. But once you raise it, you could never decrease it.
Oh, so they don't have to say their base pay's like $100,000, and then they raise it to like 115. It can't go back.
It
down.
can never go back. Right? It's like age. It only goes up.
Okay, well, what if, so like, okay, so say that woman that died,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
so the person that took her position,
gets the same salary as she did.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, huh? And like that way, it's like, hey, you can never hold their salary over their heads and try to say, if you don't make the decisions we like, we're going to lower your salary.
Did that lady that Trump appointed, did she take Ruth Bader Ginsburg's
Yes.
job? So you're telling me she's getting Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Yes.
paid?
And so the only one that gets more than the others is the chief, and it's like an extra $15,000. Sorry, that's the way it goes. They would increase it because every now and again cost of living increases, and I mean it's a pretty demanding position. And if anything, I don't want to say they're underpaid, but they kind of are underpaid. It's like $250,000, and the chief gets a little bit more than that. It's a nice gig. All right, now you can't reduce their salaries. Okay, something else that's important for the court here too. Who controls what cases they hear? They do. They don't have to hear cases if they don't want to. Sometimes on controversial issues, they can just be like, nah, we won't hear it.
Is that like with the George Floyd case? I forget his name, Derek something. It's taken forever to get to that.
What is it?
Like with the
With Derek Chauvin, I know.
yeah.
What about him?
like, they're taking forever to, like, get his case in, like, I read something about it, there's something supposed to happen in March, and they couldn't find a jury or
Well, it was hard to find a jury because trying to find an impartial jury was really difficult because everybody's heard about this case to an
Yeah.
extent. And even, if he gets convicted, which there's a pretty good chance that he will, he could try to appeal his case, and that could take years to play out. So, sometimes it does take a long time. And even if it gets to the point where he tried to appeal it to the Supreme Court, if they did not want to, they could reject that. So they control their own agenda. Now, think of this. I don't know if you all saw this over the weekend. There was another mass shooting in North Carolina. 7 people shot and killed Saturday. And when that happens, can the executive branch, the president, and Congress, can they avoid it? They have to talk about it. They've got to do something. But the Supreme Court's like, we don't have to do anything. Somebody brings us a gun case, great. But if not, it's okay too. What is it?
If they're not gonna deal with controversial cases, then what's the point? Because they're the most important.
Are they? Why are they the most important?
I mean, if it's like gun control or something, that's a problem now.
A lot of people say that they shouldn't avoid tough cases, but they still control their own agenda. Alright, so they've got some things that keep them isolated. Now, one more thing, and I think we mentioned this. One of the Supreme Court's rules, you know what they don't? Like, they have audio recordings of everything, they have written transcripts, they have official opinions of the court that anybody can read, but they do not allow cameras in the Supreme Court. Not while it's going on. You don't get to video the proceedings. The news doesn't get to do it, nobody gets to do it. Why would they do that?
Because people acted up.
Not because they acted up, but what?
They acted different in front of the camera.
When the camera's rolling, people perform. They grandstand. They want to flex on other people. And we don't want our judges and attorneys to do that. We want them to focus on the law. Another thing you never see Supreme Court justices do, it's very rare for, especially a sitting Supreme Court justice, to do an interview because they're afraid they'll tip their hand on something and reveal a prejudice or a bias in cases, and they don't want to do that. So typically they don't do interviews, and there's no cameras allowed in the Supreme Court. It is very much like a temple. It's a cult. I don't remember. Just kidding, sort of. Right? Now, when you start appointing federal judges, there's a lot of things to consider. When you're a president and you're wanting to appoint judges, there's so many things that we have to consider. One of the things we have to consider, the American Bar Association and their thoughts on the issues. The American Bar Association, the Association for Attorneys and Lawyers, which are inherently the same thing. Right, the American Bar Association has a list of judges. They have a list of judges who they think would be good for promotions or elevations to higher levels. Attorneys who are very bright. People that are well respected in their particular community. And so they have a list, and when the White House needs a name, they can help provide with one. Okay, but the ABA is not all you look at. I remember how we said there are 94 districts, and the districts are all the ones broken up by the dashed lines on the map. Those districts in West Virginia's got the northern and southern districts. We have 2 districts. Anytime that there's a vacancy for one of those judge positions there, the president gives what's called a senatorial courtesy. Meaning the president, the White House, they call up the senators in that area and say, hey, here's who we're thinking about appointing. Do you have any problems with this person? So if we wanted to appoint Mia over here to be a federal district court judge in the Southern District in West Virginia, the Biden administration would call up Joe Manchin and Shelley Moore Capito and say, hey, we're considering Mia Billups. Do you have any objections? Or is there anything that you guys as West Virginians would know that maybe we here in Washington, D.C. don't know? Right? So the senators get a little input as well. It's just a kindness. That's why they call it a courtesy. You don't have to do it if you're the president, but it's just good politics. All right. So you look at what the ABA recommends. You talk to the senators in the area if it's a lower court judge. Other things you want to consider, especially on the Supreme Court: race. Does the race of a judge matter? It shouldn't, but it does. In some ways, though, that's a good thing. Right here, you got Clarence Thomas, who is only the second black person to serve on the Supreme Court. You've only had one Hispanic person in the court's history. Why do we want different races on the court? Why is diversity a good thing? Different points of view that's representative of the country. Okay? There are things that inherently black people or Hispanic people would understand that white people do not. But there's more to it than just adding diversity. I would love to tell you that we just want a diverse Supreme Court or diverse level of federal judges, but that's not entirely true. President Obama appoints the first Hispanic judge in Sonia Sotomayor in 2010. Why on earth would he specifically want to appoint a Hispanic person? And makes him look good to who? That group of people, Hispanic people. Incidentally, President Obama had to worry about re-election in 2012. And take a guess, which racial group is the fastest growing block of voters in the country? Hispanics. And Obama said, yes, we do want diversity on the court. We do want a Hispanic person serving on the highest court in the land. But at the same time, if I can secure some extra votes, that will not be a bad thing. Yes? Clarence Thomas was appointed by George H.W. Bush. He's the longest serving one. He was appointed in 1991. Okay? Now, something else that's relevant too, you look at race as an issue, but we also look at gender. Okay? That matters. What, you don't like that one? Come on, squad goals. Those 4 women until last year were the only 4 women to have been on the court. On the far left was Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman ever appointed, which was appointed by Ronald Reagan, a Republican. And then you have Sonia Sotomayor second, Ruth Bader Ginsburg third, and Elena Kagan on the far right. Ginsburg has since passed away. Rip Ruth. And she's been replaced by a woman, though, Amy Coney Barrett. I know it bothers you, doesn't it?
Yeah, she's the total opposite.
It happens. It's the way it goes. Now, women, why do you want women on the court? There are different perspectives that women have, yes.
So, why would Trump assign her knowing it would, like, upset so many people?
All right, that's a good question. First of all, why is he insistent on appointing a woman?
Because he wants to look good to women.
He wants to look good towards women. He has an upcoming election. No, you see, even if you burn that bridge, you have to try. And ultimately, look, he understands that Amy Coney Barrett's not going to be liked by liberals, okay? But you get that. That's part of the gig. And we'll talk about that in ideology here, too. But no matter who he was going to pick, what were liberals going to say? Boo, we don't like her. She's no Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Okay, well, shouldn't he lean towards impressing liberals since there are so many of them?
No.
A lot of women are liberals.
You're right. Now, here's the bizarre thing. Hang on, I'm going to tell you why we don't do that in a second. 51% of the population in America are women, and they've never had more than a third of the Supreme Court at any one time. And that's now, okay? So you've only got 3 justices on the court that are women, and that's a lot in history terms, all right? And women do understand things that men do not. There was a case, and I was talking to Second Mod about this a few years ago. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was actually a part of this case where they were determining about an illegal search of a student at a middle school. And I swear this is true. I think it was either Connecticut or Vermont. A middle school principal, they got a report this girl was carrying drugs, and she didn't have any in her backpack, so they made her strip down to her underwear, and they searched her clothes and belongings. Her parents filed a lawsuit, and it went to the Supreme Court, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, look, I know that my male colleagues can understand that this would be, not an okay thing, but you need to know specifically that girls would take this trauma far differently than boys would. And she said, look, having female perspective on the court is very important, and that they understand things that simply men do not, okay? But there are political considerations too. And like I said, Trump's trying to reach out to female voters. Look, those two that are in the picture that are still on the court now, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, Obama appointed both of them because he said, look, not only do I want more women on the court, but this will help secure more votes, okay? That you have to think about that. Now, this takes us to our next thing here, ideology and political party. When you're the president, one of the perks of being president is the fact that you get to pick people who think like you do. So our Supreme Court nominees, like if Deal over here is a president, his appointees are probably going to look very different than, say, Elena's appointees. Right? He's a little more on the conservative libertarian side, and Elena, I'm just going to go and guess and see you're more on the liberal side. So your appointees are going to be different. That's one of the perks you get. All right? If Deal is appointing nominees, what political ideology are they more likely to have? Conservative. Okay? And if Elena appoints them, they're going to be more liberal. But here's the thing about it. Do you pick somebody on the extreme end? No. Why not? You don't care about fair. You don't even care about that. There's a practical matter too. Deal, let's say a Deal appoints an extremely super right-wing conservative justice. Who's going to be upset about it? The liberals. And what could they do to stop it from happening? Not approve him in the Senate. Okay? You don't appoint people who are on the extreme ends of it. You pick somebody like Deal's going to pick somebody conservative, but they'll be somewhere in that moderate to conservative camp. They're not going to be extreme because he says, I've got to get this person past Senate confirmation. All right? And ultimately, I might need some of those Democrats to help me pass legislation in the future. Because let's say Deal does pick a really extreme right-wing person, and he somehow manages to get it past the Senate and get them confirmed to the court. Those Democrats are going to be seething angry. And are they going to be helping him on legislation in the future? No. They're going to be like, we're going to remember this. Right? So you appoint people that are closer to moderate. Yeah, they're in your camp, your team, but they're not over-the-top extremists. Right? Now, back to your question with Amy Coney Barrett. Okay? Trump appoints her, she's a woman. Where does she fall in the ideology?
Right.
She's on the right, she's conservative, but she's not as right-wing as what people want you to believe. However, what did Democrats want Americans to believe about her? She's a crazy right-wing nut job, super Christian fundamentalist, and if she gets her way, then you know what? There'll be no abortions, no birth control. It'll be the Handmaid's Tale.
I'm convinced she's a man.
What? No, why would you say that?
She's 110% a man.
No, she's
Just
not.
look at her. She is a man.
Let's take a look.
She has 110% has a penis.
You know this is being recorded, right? All right, look.
I can see it.
Anyways, now that you guys are done presuming this person's gender,
I'm not presuming.
you're looks shaming.
Well,
Okay?
she is ugly, but that's not.
Oh my gosh. All right, look. Back to reality for a minute. When you are considering a Supreme Court justice, you think about ideology, but obviously you also think about party too. Okay? And remember, that's not entirely the same. If you're a Democrat, you're probably going to appoint somebody who's a Democrat. Same thing with a Republican. That's just part of the game. Okay? So you don't care, like if right now, if you're Joe Biden and you got to appoint a Supreme Court justice, and let's say one of the conservative justices either retires or dies, you don't care that you're appointing a liberal. People know that's part of the game. That's how it goes. That's the perk of being president. Ugly. They're all ugly.
Okay, no, I'm just saying. If you look at it, she looks like a drag queen with her wig on. Like, if you just compare her next to a drag queen, you'll see.
Okay. All right, moving right along.
I don't want her.
Well, I guess Amy Coney Barrett can come and read to students, huh?
If she can even read.
Do you watch RuPaul's Drag Race?
No, I don't. Let's talk about judicial philosophy. Another thing you have to consider, judicial philosophy. All right, there's two main schools of thought when you're considering the Supreme Court nominees and how they look at cases, okay? One is what we call judicial restraint, right? People who believe in judicial restraint, they believe that you should rarely overturn precedent, that you should stick to precedent as much as possible, keep as much consistency. They look at the Constitution and say you should try to interpret the Constitution as closely to its original meaning as possible. We don't deviate unless we absolutely have to. You stick to the original meaning of the Constitution. We don't overturn precedent. Gives us the best amount of consistency. We need to give a lot of wisdom or a lot of thought to the wisdom of the Founding Fathers. Right? That's judicial restraint. Now, it's not always this way, but who do you think tends to be more in the line of judicial restraint? More conservatives. But it's not always that way. You'll find that out in a minute. Okay? Other people believe in what we call judicial activism. Judicial activists are more willing to overturn precedent. They look at the Constitution as constantly changing with each generation, that its meaning changes. Right? People who believe in judicial activism, they're more willing to overturn precedent. They're like, the meaning of the Constitution changes over time. They like to call the Constitution, it's a living document. I'm like, hold on there, boomer, all right? It's not alive, but I get why you would say the interpretation changes, okay? And, of course, they tend to be more on the liberal side. Now, again, that's not always true. It's amazing. They flip-flop sometimes depending on the position, but usually you have one frame of mind that dominates your viewpoint. Should we stick to what the founders meant in the 1800s, or should we reinterpret this almost every generation?
Well, a lot changes over time. Like you were saying with same-sex marriage, that changed over time also.
Well, so have guns, and you know what, people get bitter about that. Like every time you're like, well, we should be allowed to own an assault rifle, and they're like, that's not what the founding fathers meant. And like, it doesn't matter, okay? So it depends, all right? One other major consideration, age. Look at that happy old man, all right? Age matters too, because who do you not want to appoint? Somebody really old, okay? You start putting it, you're like, I'm going to put time into considering who this person is, and so I only want somebody who's going to be around for a long time, right? In fact, I can't think of a Supreme Court justice in my lifetime that got appointed after the age of 70.
That's still a little high.
What? We just elected a 72-year-old president.
I did.
What is it?
You only turn 40 years, not like until you die.
I know. Look, it is pretty.
That's true.
I mean, if you're in your now, they try to go for 50s, but it used to be considered 60s.
I think that it's been age will not everything.
Of course, you would, you ageist.
I'm an ageist and I'm proud of it.
Oh my gosh, you'll be an ageist until you get old, and you're like, nobody did it like our generation.
No, still probably
Oh gosh, it's a good place for us to stop right there, kiddo.